should be recording.
Yes, I see the button lit up.
Okay. All righty. Okay, good morning, everyone. We're gathered here today to have a discussion and presentation on the area of copyright, fair use, and open educational resources here at John Jay College of Criminal Justice of the City University of New York. The idea for this panel grew out of some discussions between faculty and librarians about the fact that there's a fair amount of confusion about how to legally and ethically use content inside the classroom and in the creation of teaching materials, especially in the open educational resources environment. And it seems that the confusion may only have gotten worse in the last few years because I think of the digital world. And the reason I would say that is, while no doubt people were photocopying huge chunks of copyrighted materials back in the analog world, I think there was a little bit clearer sense that this was not what people should be doing. And I think it probably limited that practice. Whereas today, with everything on our screens, the world has been kind of flattened, the information world. And I think many of us have heard people say, well, it's on the web and it's free, so I can use it any way I want, right? So we've got a lot of interesting points to make here. And let me just turn to our panelists and ask everyone to briefly introduce themselves. I'll call on you in the order on my screen. Ellen Sexton.
Hi, I'm Ellen Sexton. I've been a librarian here at John Jay for about 26 years. I started library practice in 1990, before the internet and the World Wide Web were widely available, 3 years before the first browsers, when the library was the only place you could go to make a copy of a document. I've been involved in various copyright-related activities here, from reserves, and now I'm the media librarian, so I'm concerned with questions on of how to deliver streaming video remotely to students.
Thank you. Kathleen?
Hi, Kathleen Collins, also a librarian here, colleague of Ellen's, and I've been here since 2007. My relationship with copyright and fair use started when I took over reserves from Ellen and trying to learn myself and educate faculty on what they could and could not put on e-reserves legally, and I learned a lot about that. And while I still answer questions, stray questions about that here and there, I became interested in the topic from a more intellectual perspective and have been involved in various CUNY committees around fair use and copyright. And so I'm always happy to talk about these questions. They're always questions, as we will see in our discussion. There's very few bright lines and hard lines in this discussion.
Right. Okay, thank you. And Ben?
Hi, I'm Ben Bierman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Art and Music. And I, along with my, or I should say, maybe kind of in concert with my musical life, I've become very interested and an activist in the area of copyright and copyright infringement. And I have carried that into the world of academia, my interest in the world of academia, and trying to help to educate people about some of these issues, and really educate myself. I've been educating myself, and Kathleen said it's a very complicated issue, and the more I know, the more I don't know. So I can understand people's confusion around a lot of these issues, and I primarily my focus in bringing it to academia and here is just to bring a perspective from an artist rights activist on the use of creators' materials in academia in this particular case.
Thanks, Ben. I'm Bruce Shenitz. I'm an adjunct librarian here at John Jay, and I'm the Open Educational Resources Librarian. I am the baby of the group. I've only been here since January of 2022, although I have worked in open educational resources at 2 other CUNY libraries. So I also have seen, as I work with faculty who are looking for and creating open educational resources, I've seen the need for more discussion and more education in the area of copyright and fair use. So in order to get started, I've asked Ellen to sort of do some table setting, and she's going to tell us everything about copyright law in 2 minutes, was it?
2 minutes or 10 minutes?
Well, I'm giving you a hard time. Let me stop sharing my screen and you can share yours. I know you have some slides.
Sure. Okay, so this is going to be a quick gallop through some background and just to remind people of various concepts. Sorry. Let me start sharing again. There we go. What are you seeing at the moment?
Not your screen yet.
Beg your pardon?
We don't see your screen yet.
Here we go.
Okay.
Okay, so do you see a slide?
Yes.
Just one slide. Okay, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So just briefly a bit of background. Some terms and concepts you've probably heard before, but the First Sale Doctrine is the legislation that allows libraries to lend a physical item to a number of different people, which is actually kind of a radical thing. We can purchase a physical book, lend it to many people, one after another, and not have to pay the copyright holder any fees. And there have been various discussions, continuing discussions going on as well. How does First Sale Doctrine, what does that mean in a world where most of the things that we're using are actually born digital objects? Fair use is a concept. Fair use and classroom copyright copying guidelines are concepts that we use a lot in education to enable us to make copies under various circumstances. Here in libraries, we do have an obligation to put notices on photocopiers and scanners reminding users that they are obliged to stay within copyright law. We generally don't police them. That's not a role we ever want to take, but we do need to guide them and advise them of their responsibilities. When it comes to born digital objects, digital books, digital journals, streaming video, these things are acquired by the library. They are not actually covered by copyright as such. They're more covered by license agreements that our institution makes with the vendors. So the terms of what we can do and not do with those items is written down in a contract, the terms of which can vary from one agreement to another. So it complicates things. The things that are not in the public domain, the things that are not covered by copyright as such are items that are in the public domain. And when it comes to published materials, anything published before 1927, we can do anything we like with it. After 1927, as this slide shows, things get very complicated. There are various different conditions as to when the thing was published and how it was published as to what we are permitted to do with it. A novel published commercially today will not enter the public domain in any of our lifetimes, which is kind of stunning. So the legislation, federal legislation covers fair use. So that the US Code, 17 US Code, Section 107, describes various limitations on the exclusive rights of copyright holder occasions on which it is okay, it is not infringement to copy something. If you are criticizing it, if you are reporting news, if you are teaching, and this is really important for us. But the law does not say what exactly is fair use. It says when you are considering whether something is fair use or not, these are things you have to think about. The purpose and the character of the use, the nature of the work, is it fact or is it fiction? The amount of the work that you are using, do you want to copy the entire novel, or do you want to copy a particular segment of it? And the effect of the use on the market for the copyrighted work. Here's a graphic, just a rather nicer graphic explaining, showing those 4 factors. What's really important for us is the effect of the use on the potential market. This means if there's a textbook out there that we would like to copy wholesale, rather than have our students each individually buy a copy of that textbook, that is absolutely forbidden. That is no way can that be fair use. There are some fair use checklists out there. Here's a link to one at Columbia University. If you want to figure out yourself whether your use could be considered fair or not, you can go through the checklist, and it will help you ask the right questions. The courts have supported fair use in all sorts of different examples here. Copying a computer program to make new programs is considered fair use. Andy Warhol using old art to make new art is fair use. Google creating databases to make information searchable, that has been considered fair use. You may have heard of something called the classroom guidelines. The classroom guidelines actually are not part of legislation, but they were included they were included in the House Committee notes accompanying the 1976 copyright law amendments. They're an agreement drawn up by publishers and an organization representing authors. And they say teachers, they consider it okay if teachers make multiple copies for their students under certain circumstances. And they say teachers must consider the brevity, spontaneity, and the cumulative effect of their copying. And they may not create anthologies, substitute for purchase, etc., etc. And these are minimum guidelines, not maximum. Essentially, they're saying if you only do this minimum copying, we will not sue you or your institution, is effectively the message from 1976. And this is these classroom guidelines, they provide what a safe harbor, which is another term that you may have heard. Okay, 1998, the Digital Millennium Copyright Act. This is pretty important. This requires CUNY, our university, to respond when notified of infringing material located on CUNY networks. Mainly they've been concerned with, I think probably basically students illegally downloading movies and so on. But it means that if infringement is found on any of our computers, if we're sharing copyrighted works via Blackboard and it is discovered and it is a serious infringement, then we will be asked to take it down. The Teach Act 2002, this covers distance education. It permits transmission of lawfully acquired content, and that's important, the lawfully acquired content part, to distance students enrolled in courses in password protected digital spaces. And it says fair use continues to apply. Okay, so when it comes to reserve readings, this is something, the reserve readings are articles or book chapters, something like that, shared by the library to students in a particular course, part of their course readings. About a dozen years ago, Georgia State University was sued for infringing copyright in providing reserve readings to students. The people suing them were representing publishers. The funding came from the Association for American Publishers and the Copyright Clearance Center. They claimed 100 examples of copyright infringement in the reserve system. The courts, this went through various different courts, throughout most of those cases, found infringement in 4 of the 100 cases. And the final case was just resolved in 2020. This took a very long time, cost an awful lot of money, took up a lot of people's attention. And in the end, nobody really won, but at the same time, nobody really lost. It was fair use. The university's interpretations of fair use were found to be accurate in most cases. During the pandemic in 2020, many publishers of digital content removed their paywalls to some or all of their content, but generally speaking, now, what are we? We're June 22. Those paywalls generally have gone back up again. When it comes to OER, when you're considering using library content for supporting zero textbook cost courses that are run over many semesters, things you should consider are, if it's a print format content, if it's a printed book that you want to copy, you should ask, is it copyrighted? Probably is. If it's not in the public domain, can you make a reasonable argument that your copying is fair use? So go to find a fair use copyright checklist and go through it. If it's digital content provided by the library, you should consider, did the library purchase the item or is it subscribing to the item? If it's a subscription, is that subscription likely to be renewed next year or not? Talk to your librarian. If you're considering using a digital book, a digital journal article, a streaming video, it is usually better to use the permanent URL of the item to link to the item rather than copying the file to avoid copyright problems. But it's really important at the start of every semester, always check the links on your syllabus. They're still working at the start of each semester. Things happen, platforms change, subscriptions change. Coming back to OER, there's some questions I like to think about OER. CUNY, as you all know, is extraordinarily underfunded. Public Advocate in 2019 composed a report on CUNY and CUNY's underfunding, talked about CUNY's precarious financial state undermining its ability to educate New York City's youth. As you may or may not know, over half of our teaching faculty, of CUNY teaching faculty, are employed part-time, adjuncts, part-time. Governor Cuomo was lobbied and agreed to fund an OER project at CUNY. It ran for what, 3-4 years now, about $4 million a year to start with. But he chose not to provide the funding that for CUNY that the Albany legislators wanted. So, you have to ask yourself why. Why is he funding OER, but he's not funding the full university? OER creation, curriculum development, it's not a one and done process, it's ongoing. And how should the labor of OER be supported? So here's a slide that I saw at a conference back in 2017. An open scholar called Mahabali. She pointed out that she's a very strong component of open access, open publishing, working in the open. However, she's one of the scholars that do criticize some aspects of this work. She pointed out every minute spent doing something in the open is a minute that a contingent scholar, adjunct, cannot be spending earning money, that a mother cannot be spending with her child. In some cultures where plagiarism is rampant, she pointed out, opening up one's material means someone else can attribute it to themselves. CCO is privilege. She's not alone. There are many scholars of openness who are providing some useful critical thoughts of the model. Just a reminder, half of all instructional staff at CUNY are adjuncts. That's the column in the middle there. Over the last 5 years, that orange line along the top, that is part-time faculty employed at CUNY. You will see a drop in 2020 and 21. When the pandemic hit, adjuncts, contingent labor, they lost their jobs. The green line is the part-time classified staff. They lost their jobs as well because they were not protected. CUNY did not show loyalty to them during this time of crisis. And just a last slide showing state support for higher education over the last 20 years. This is not accounting for inflation. This is just in absolute dollar terms across the United States. State support for higher education remained pretty flat until 2015-16, and then it started to go up a little bit. But just think in terms of following the money. why are we choosing to fund education in some ways and not in other ways? And we're representing, you know, we're here, we're a publicly funded university. We're teaching our students with using part-time workers, using adjuncts, and now we're telling them, well, actually, you can't even use a textbook, you've got to write your own textbook. So just a thought. Don't get me wrong, there are many, many wonderful things about OER. My question is, how should we be funding the work of OER? What is the appropriate way to do that? And I'll stop now. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ellen. I just want to add, that was a great overview of copyright and fair use. You know, I learned a lot. And I just want to add one little thing to that. Ellen was focused on traditional copyright and I think mentioned in passing Creative Commons licensing, CCO. And I think this is a useful little diagram. If you think about rights on a spectrum, we have traditional copyright where all rights are reserved to the creator. We have public domain where no rights are reserved. Creative Commons is somewhere in the middle, and I know we're going to touch a little more on that, where some rights are reserved. There's a variety of different licensing possibilities. I am just going to show this. This may be a little bit confusing, but these symbols show what one can do with a particular piece of Creative Commons licensed work. Some you have great freedom to remix, revise, reuse. Others you have much less freedom. Some explicitly limit whether it can be used for commercial purposes. See the $ with the slash. There's lots of information on Creative Commons that, you know, when it's time for you to make use of either a Creative Commons licensed item or use it for your own work if you so desire. I, at this point, would like to turn to Ben. I know this panel actually grew out of some conversations that you and I and Ellen and Kathleen have also been having. And it struck me that I think there are two big areas of concern that you've highlighted. I would say the first one has to do with how people use and misuse copyrighted material in their teaching, in their own creative work, creating teaching materials. And the second area is something that Ellen got to at the end of her remarks, which is a wider thought about what is this OER, where is it going, what does it mean for creators of content, whether it's artistic, whether it's scholarly, and so on. So why don't we start with the first part on the use and abuse of copyright by professional teachers.
First of all, thanks. And that was great, Ellen. And you're going to have to excuse me. All of a sudden, they're doing construction outside on my building with drills right on my line here. So please excuse that. I hope it's okay. And I'm really happy to be here. And the copyright in academia is something that I've been annoying people with for a few years now. And at one point, also a number of years ago, I dropped by the library to speak to our august librarians, including Kathleen and Ellen. And I love libraries, and I think I really would have enjoyed library science, and I have great appreciation for libraries and for librarians. And these two are, and Bruce, we're just getting to know each other, but I know Alan and Kathleen and think really highly of both of them. And we had interesting talks where we had different takes on things, but we really appreciated everything that each other has to say. And I think we're in concert. We're in basic agreement on most everything, but there are some differences in way we probably look at some things. I will address your two questions, but let me just kind of briefly, and as we spoke about before we started this, I'm not saying this, I'm not trying to debate these issues, right? But I would like to comment on fair use. And I have a different way of looking at it, and so do many legal scholars. Of course, there's legal scholars on a wide spectrum on how they look at copyright and fair use. But anytime you use copyrighted material, you are subject to being sued for infringement. That's just a fact. There's no matter any guidelines that are presented by a society, by your library, by anything, they're meaningless, except maybe they're guides, but they're not anything. They have nothing to do with law. Like Ellen said, there's not legislation. I didn't know, Ellen, that those notes were put into 76 Copyright Act. So I learned, as one of many things I learned when you were speaking. But those four little points that they have, that's all that's been legislated, right? It's completely vague. Everything is decided in the courts. So a lot of people look at fair use as immediately and inherently infringement, but it's infringement that can possibly be protected by the courts if you're sued, right? I don't care what guidelines, how careful you are, you can be sued for fair use. So all these guidelines and everything, it's in a way it's helpful and it's thoughtful, but it's not meaningful in terms of law. So that's just a different perspective on fair use. In terms of let me get to your second question first about OER, because I would like to, Ellen raised some really good questions about OER that really are the same questions that I have. And a big one, since this is something we're doing for people that are being trained and being paid for doing this, right? And I just got off the phone with one of my colleagues who just did this. We're professional people. We deserve, and full-time faculty, we don't work for free, and we get paid very well, in fact. And adjuncts deserve to be paid for all of their work. And we do, in my department, for example, we have 85% taught by adjuncts. And this person that did his course recently, he was paid $4,500. Not bad. Probably not fair for the amount of hours that he put in, but it is a positive thing, and I think that it's great that we are paying people to do this, and it brings up what kind of underlies all my arguments, which is what Ellen raised, is we're talking with OER, we're talking about free materials. Right. In this case, school gets paid their tuition, right? Now CUNY used to be free. Now it's I don't know, affordable. I don't know. It's affordable for some, not affordable for others, right? Private institutions are outrageously expensive, way past what's happened with inflation. How anyone can afford $80,000 a year for 4 years is just unimaginable to me. It's gotten totally out of hand, what education costs. But schools get their tuition, instructors get paid, students get free materials, and there's one person left out of this, and that's the creator, right? The creator is the only person, and these are materials that instructors and schools are deeming important to teach to students, right? But yet, it has no value, evidently. Right? That's the one person that does not get compensated, right? And so for me, really a bottom line is education should be free and creators should be paid for their work. You know, it's kind of the whole thing is backwards, right? So that's kind of a radical way of looking at it, right? I mean, you know, I mean, that's not a reality, but that is a philosophical underpinning of how I think of it. You mind if I share my slides so I can, here, let me
Sure,
see.
please do.
I think this is right. So I kind of, you know, I say, what are our responsibilities as academics? You know, a really important thing is that we are, you know, I'm speaking more to full-time faculty now than I am to adjunct faculty. We have very, very different circumstances. As full-time faculty, we are subsidized creators. We can afford to put out an academic book that has absolutely no money involved, zero, right? There's no, you know, how many people get advances? Not very many. How many people get royalties? Not very many, right? But we can afford that because we're subsidized. Creators are not, right? Creators make their living from their creations. So I say here, I believe that it's our responsibility. These are people, and we are teaching the work of these people. And I believe we have a responsibility to support these creators. And it may be, you know, people are very annoyed that copyright is long, right? The copyright term is very long. And that's debate, whether it should be shorter is certainly a debatable point. But this is international law, right? This is not just United States law. United States law came to that very late. We were like one of the last countries to expand our terms. So sometimes the estates get money. Personally, I don't see a problem with that. A lot of people do. They say, you know, but creators, what do they have to share with their families? If you have an apartment, if you have a home, you leave that to your families. If you have a business, you can leave it to your family. Creators should be able to leave their work to their estates for a certain amount of time. So I think we have a responsibility for that. Ellen laid out very well. The library has all kinds of ways to share resources, which I just think are terrific and I make use of. And I think it's great that I wish they had a bigger budget. They need a much bigger budget. I would, you know, without knowing the numbers, I would say it should be doubled or tripled at least. You know, I don't even bother to ask for books or journals to be bought because I know that you can't afford them. But when we make our courses on Blackboard, we cannot share. You know, sharing a MP3 that students can download is illegal. That's illegal. Sharing a PDF, putting up a PDF that they can download. You need to be careful of these things, you know. That's why I talk about fair use in the way I do. And I think an important question is to answer is, what if your book, and I guarantee you, pretty much every book that is published has an illegal PDF of it out there somewhere. And really quickly, and probably directly from the publisher. But how do you feel about that? How do you feel about somebody just sending your book around that you worked for 3-4 years on, that you have the copyright on? If most chances are, you won't feel good about that. Chances are that's not a positive thing for you. If it is, the only reason is because you're subsidized and you don't need the money, right? A creator cannot afford that. So those are some things that I think about. Here again with open education, I said this already, everybody gets paid but the creator. And I went over this. Now, one thing that prompts OER is the expensive textbooks. Now, we know that they have been way too expensive for many years, right? A lot of textbooks are wildly overcharged, and I have a textbook on the market with Oxford University Press. I know editors in the business, and they agree that they shot themselves in the foot by charging, $250 for some biology textbook that, no one can afford that, right? So I think that's a problem, but at the same time, just looking at my textbook, for example, for under $50, you can use, of course now they rent ebooks, right? Unfortunately, instead of buying, but for $50 for one semester taking my course, you have access to content, to close to 100 full audio examples, not examples, the entire audio file, licensed video, licensed photos, right, and licensed articles. And so so everybody's getting paid. Everybody gets something. The student pays under $50 for the right to use all those materials, and the creators get compensated for them. I think that's fair. I think that's a fair price for people. Now, if a student has no money, we have book vouchers. If the book vouchers are not covering the cost of materials, well, then that's a problem. It's not necessarily the problem that the content has to be paid for, but they need, if some student doesn't have any money, they need to be subsidized. Why is it that the creator should be giving it away rather than us subsidizing education more effectively? That's what Ellen was talking about as well. And this idea of OER runs parallel, I think, to the notion that, quote unquote, information needs to be free. That's a very damaging trope that's been going on, and oftentimes the fair use and free speech are conflated, and they're completely different issues. Information in this case is someone's creative work, and they deserve to be paid. So I've been over this already. Let me just see what else, if I had anything else here. So this is what I was talking about. As subsidized creators, I think we have a responsibility, and I'm going to stop sharing because I said everything already. But these are issues that I think are important for us to be thinking about, and what are our responsibilities as academics and just as human beings when we go to a restaurant, we pay for our meal, we don't dine and dash, right? We go to the grocery store, we don't walk out with a steak under our arms, we pay our rent, but yet music and creative endeavors are supposed to be free. Photograph, everything's supposed to be free now. And this does have to do, as Bruce and Ellen were saying also, is that it's different in the digital age, right? So we have to be, so I think I combined your two questions. I don't know. Yeah, I think I combined your two questions.
Combining is good. You remixed and reused.
I'm done.
I'm going to throw back one point, and it may be a little sort of nitty-gritty and in the weeds for this discussion, but I'm wondering if Ellen or Kathleen could talk about the use of copyrighted materials in Blackboard in that environment. I actually, and because I need to know this too, what are the limits? What constitutes legal and or fair use of copyrighted materials when it's in Blackboard limited to that one class of 20 or 30 students?
I would say that the fair use and the guidelines apply no matter where you are. There's no difference. You should be using the same principles. I believe there is some protection, some good in the fact that you're behind something that's password protected. But it doesn't, I have seen over the years, faculty have the idea that because it's in my classroom, whether that classroom is virtual or real, that I can do anything I want. And I think that's false. And you just, Ellen, you can correct me or amend, but I don't think there's a difference, except for you had the added protection of a password.
I agree. Yes, fair use still applies. Password protected is better than pushing things out on the open web without any protections. But still, yes, we have to stay within the fair use guidance.
If I could add to that also, one of the fair use issue, one thing that's kind of noted as possible as good fair use, say in a classroom, if you pass out materials to be used only in the classroom, right? So if you have a I think there's settings, right, for if you have an audio clip, if you have an MP3 or something, whether you can designate whether it can be downloaded or not. Same thing with the PDF. So if it's something that can only be viewed rather than shared, that also could be a way of being closer to fair use.
Right.
If somebody can listen to the MP3 but cannot share it, that would be that would just be like me playing it in class.
Exactly.
Right? But once they can download it, then that's a different matter.
We do when it comes to text content, the library does purchase digital books, for example, and the price of a digital book can vary depending on what can be done with it rather than by the content. The same book, we might pay a little bit more for the book so that we can get it with the ability for our users to download the book or the chapters of the book. If it is DRM free, generally speaking, the publisher will charge a little bit more than if we were to buy a single user, one user at a time, a copy. And unfortunately, digital books are generally sold to institutions, to libraries at a priced at a much higher level than the print format book. So you see a paperback and you say, oh, why can't the library buy it? It only costs $20. Then you think, okay, $20 to you, but to the library, the digital version, which anyone can read at any time, that might cost us $100, $200.
Yeah, well, I take advantage of, I've been taking a lot of advantage of being able to download books from our library's website that you have paid for, and it's greatly appreciated. But this issue of the price of ebooks has just been, there was just a court case in Maryland just within the last week where Maryland actually passed legislation that said that they could control prices charged to the libraries, and it was overturned by the courts. And this legislation was also passed in New York State and was vetoed by the governor within the last within the last year. So there has been sometimes libraries are in conflict with creators' content. There are times, like and so sometimes I can come in conflict sometimes with librarians about these issues, and certainly I have conflict with CUNY Central attitudes towards Creative Commons. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to quickly, I forgot to comment, Bruce, on your Creative Commons stuff. And Creative Commons is a really complicated issue. And Creative Commons was started by Lawrence Lessig, a very controversial figure, a very anti-copyright figure who has gone to the Supreme Court twice at least and has lost around issues of copyright. He's very much an activist. But people don't really understand Creative Commons, and really your slide is actually deceptive to me, because Creative Commons is on top of copyright. Copyright still exists.
Mhm.
Right? Creative, and that's the first thing to know about Creative Commons is that, and there's the, if you care to look at the fine print of Creative Commons, which I know none of you have, and almost nobody has that uses Creative Commons, it's really intense. And if you read it, you would not like it. I mean, you know, we never read all that stuff that we get when we use software, right? I mean, it's really, it's not good when you read it. And any of those licenses that you mentioned that you wrote there, you can put that on your work without that CC. The CC means nothing. It all, you know, and actually the whole thing really means nothing because copyright still holds. But you could put the exact same words on the top of your paper and leave off CC, leave off Creative Commons, and it has the exact same effect. Creative Commons is really abstract. It makes it easy to use. It creates these. It created these various levels that you know of attribute of you know of how people can use your work. But that was always true, and it will always be true, regardless of Creative Commons. So I see it as an anti-copyright activist organization, and I agree with the idea of all of those, all the levels of ability to share. I think that's great. Why shouldn't somebody be able to share their work if they want to in whatever way they choose? But it doesn't have to be through Creative Commons.
Fair enough. I think that really highlights the thing that's underlying a lot of our discussion today, which is this ongoing tension between dispersal of information and the protection of the creators of information, and how do we find a balance that is respectful of both of those principles of encouraging creation by protecting the work and the rights of the creator and the availability of information to a larger public. I think that as we're kind of nearing the end of our time, I'm wondering if anyone has any final thoughts that they want to leave our listeners with.
I do have a few things that are sort of related to, they may not be connected, but I'd like to share them anyway. The word balance, Bruce, is exactly right. I think this entire thing is a balancing act, and putting myself in the shoes of those people that you're working with, the faculty creating OER, who may be listening to what we're saying. It may be daunting and off-putting because it is such a fraught issue. And while I agree with so much of what Ben was saying, he's right, we are in concert. And it seems to me at times, this is a simplistic and perhaps controversial take, but sometimes OER feels to me like we're trying to solve problems caused by other people, you know, other sectors, capitalism, etc. And it just doesn't, it doesn't work very well for all the reasons previously stated. But it's where we are. It's what we have right now. It's what most of the people watching this are in it because they want to help students. And that is something we all have in common. So it's like, well, while we're in this together, let's try to do the best we can. And so putting myself in the shoes of somebody making something and grappling with these ideas for the first time, I just want to sort of be a little coach and say, try not to operate on fear and fear of being sued. Because for one thing, in the digital realm, you're just going to get the worst case scenario is you're going to get a takedown notice and you take it down. You know, that's the work. You're not going to get papers served to you. But it's also possible to think of it as just use common sense. And I feel like Ben alluded to this quite a bit. It's like, think of yourself as the creator of a work. How would you want people to be using it fairly? What is too much? What is the minimum necessary that you need to use? I do think we should be sharing our work. We should be able to use copyrighted works in education and in other settings. And so don't be scared off so much that you can't do anything. And finally, I think, you know, this is such a third rail issue. People avoid talking about it when they absolutely should be talking about it. This is a fantastic teachable moment for your students. So, you know, as a faculty member who's created an OER, find opportunities to talk about your students about the making of that thing, because they are in this world of, you know, content is everywhere, everything should be free, and it's not, and they need to learn and be careful too. So if you share your experiences with them, even on a very basic level, I think that can be a really valuable service.
That's great. Thank you, Kathleen. That was a really good summation.
Yeah, I appreciate that, because I probably sounded a little severe, you know. So I appreciate that.
No, it's all necessary.
Great. That sounds like a good place to conclude, unless Ellen wanted to add anything at this point.
No, I think Kathleen's summing up was terrific. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. I know I learned a lot this morning, and I had some thoughts provoked, and I hope that our listeners, our audience for this discussion will have the same experience. So with that, we'll conclude, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. Thank you. Great to see everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Yeah.